Hey there. Another episode cleared for public release, but just barely. Today we need to talk about something we say all the time on this show, and that is making reference to the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth. That phrase is not just decoration. It's not just a dramatic way of saying government contracting is complicated. No, the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth is the world we work in. It's the rules, the clauses, the acronyms, the portals, the agency-specific explanations, the training gaps, the compliance obligations, the leadership's assumptions. It's the entire environment. It is our world. And if you work in this business long enough, you'll learn something very quickly. Being a government contracting professional is not hard because one thing is confusing. It's hard because everything connects to everything else. And half the time, nobody tells you where those connections are. That is the labyrinth, I call it. And here's the problem. A lot of companies send people into that maze with a badge, a laptop, a recycled template, and the cheerful instruction to just follow the process. What process? The written one? The real one? The old one? Is there a new one? Or perhaps the one everybody actually uses when the deadline is tomorrow and the customer's asking questions. And that's where people get lost. Not because they're new or even stupid. Not because they don't care. Because this industry is a maze, and too many companies hand people a flashlight with dead batteries and call it onboarding.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.
Broadcasting from deep inside the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth, this is the GovCon Show. This show is for acquisition pros, wannabe pros, and procurement insiders who need a place to unpack the chaos. We speak fluent contracting and sarcasm. No clearance required. This is the GovCon Show. And away we go!
All right, welcome back to the GovCon Show. Now, yes, you hear it in our video intro every episode. Broadcasting from deep within the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth. You know, you hear that phrase at least twice in every episode. The Federal Acquisition Labyrinth. Well, today we're not using it as branding. I want us to talk about what it actually means to work inside of one. You know, as a condition of employment. Because if you're in the profession of government contracting, you're not just doing a job. You're operating inside an environment that changes, shifts, expands, contracts, and occasionally asks you to interpret 3 different documents written by people who were clearly not speaking to each other. And somehow, you're supposed to keep up. You know, that's the part people outside the industry do not understand. They think government contracting is shifting paperwork. Adorable, isn't it? Government contracting is not paperwork. Government contracting is judgment. Judgment under pressure inside a rule-heavy environment where the wrong assumption can bring a business problem, a customer problem, a compliance problem, or all 3 wearing the same ugly jacket. That's why this show exists, because this profession needed a place where we could stop pretending the maze is simple. This maze is not simple. It's very complicated. It is demanding. Sometimes it's absurd. And it does not care that your inbox already has 137 unread emails. Let's start here. The labyrinth is bigger than regulation. The labyrinth is not just the FAR. Oh, sure, the FAR is part of it. So are the DFARS, agency supplements, contract clauses, flowdowns, policy memos, customer instructions, all the procurement systems and small business requirements, cybersecurity obligations, labor rules, billing expectation, audit concerns, and whatever new acronym showed up while we were trying to eat lunch. But the regulation is only one layer. The real labyrinth is what happens when all of that hits the company, because every rule has to be translated into action. Somebody has to decide what it truly means. Somebody has to decide who owns it, who is responsible for it, and whether or not it applies. And then somebody has to decide what evidence do you need to maintain, and how do the company will actually do whatever it's requiring you to do. And that's where theory walks into reality and immediately twists an ankle. A clause may be clear on paper, but inside the business, it has to move through departments, through systems and people, habits and deadlines, budgets, priorities, and personalities. Now, that's not a straight line. That is a maze with carpeting. Let's just talk about the person inside the maze. Who do you guess is the person inside the maze? Yep, the contracting professional, the subcontract administrator, the procurement specialist, or the buyer. The program person who got pulled into contracts work because apparently you're good with details is now a career path. These people are expected to know a ridiculous amount. They are expected to understand the rules, to follow the company policies, to support operations, protect the business, respond quickly, document properly, communicate clearly, and somehow not age visibly during a single sole source justification review. Now, while they're doing all that, the environment keeps moving. Rules keep changing. Guidance shift. Customers interpret things differently. Systems get updated. Leadership priorities change. New risk appear. Old risk gets renamed so they can attend more meetings. But the profession demands continuous awareness. You cannot just learn government contracting once. This is not a crock pot. You do not set it and forget it. If you stop paying attention, the environment moves without you. And that's one of the most exhausting parts of this profession. You're not just doing the work. You're constantly trying to understand whether the ground under the work has changed. That's what I call the myth of just follow me, the process. You see, whenever things get confusing, companies love to say, just follow the process. That sounds so responsible. It also sounds like something printed on a motivational poster in the windowless conference room. The problem is that the process is not always visible. Sometimes it's written in procedure. Sometimes it's buried down in a spreadsheet. And sometimes it's also known by 3 people, 2 of whom are on PTO, and the third's in a meeting called alignment sync, which legally should be considered a cry for help. Sometimes the process exists, but it does not match the tool. Sometimes the tool exists and nobody trusts it. Most of the time, the policy says one thing and the customer expects another, and the program manager wants a third. And finance is asking why nobody told them about this 2 weeks ago. So when leadership says, just follow the process, the working level hears, please navigate the maze we've not fully explained while pretending the path is obvious. That is not leadership. That is optimism wearing a blazer. We can all agree that people do not usually get lost at the obvious points. They get lost in the gray areas. When something kind of applies, but the customer asks for something informally. When the subcontractor pushes back, when the company has a rule, but exceptions are common enough to have their own weather pattern. And that's where the labyrinth shows up. not in clean, pretty examples, in the messy middle. The messy middle is where true contracting professionals earn their money, because the hard part is not reading the rule. The hard part is understanding how the rule behaves inside the real world. And that's what separates someone who can quote a clause from someone who can actually operate in this business. Honestly, that's why training matters. Not checkbox training, not the kind where someone clicks through 87 slides while thinking about dinner. Real training, the kind that explains how the pieces fit together, why the issues matter, what judgment looks like, and when to raise your hand before the situation turns into a group project from hell. Now, the federal side is confusing enough, but then companies add their own maze on top of it. They create internal processes and tools and checklists and flowdowns and templates, trackers and status meetings, and those darn SharePoint libraries that look like they were designed during a hostage negotiations. At some point, the company forgets that every layer it adds has to be understood by a human being. Every extra step creates a new question. Every unofficial workaround becomes one more hidden corridor in the maze. And then leadership wonders why people are slow. Well, they're not always slow. Sometimes they're just trying to figure out which door is real. The company says we need better execution. Maybe. That may be so. Or maybe you need fewer secret passageways. Another part of the labyrinth is information overload. And information overload is not competence. GovCon professionals are surrounded by information, updates, alerts, webinars, clause changes, agency guidance, internal policy revisions even, conference slides, and someone's terrifying summary of what this means for us. That somehow makes it much worse. Information is everywhere, but understanding is not so easy. That's often the root of many issues. A company can drown people in information and still leave them underprepared. Sending people more material is not the same thing as helping them make sense of it. Everything might matter and be urgent. Everything might be a risk. And when everything is treated as important, people lose the ability to tell what actually is important. That's when judgment gets tired. And tired judgment is very dangerous. So now, can you guess the one skill this profession really requires? Navigation. Not memorization, but navigation. The really valuable skill in our profession is the ability to navigate. The best GovCon professionals are not the people who pretend to know everything in the world. Those people are exhausting and usually wrong by Thursday. The best people know how to navigate. They know where to look, what questions to ask. When something feels off, they know when to slow down. They also know who needs to be involved. They know when the issue is no longer routine. And they know when the maze has changed. That is professional skill. But here's the thing. Navigation is not instinctive. It's developed. It's developed through experience and exposure, through training and mentoring, through seeing what happens when someone takes the wrong turn and everyone pretends the GPS was working. If your company is not developing navigators, then you're depending on luck. And luck is not a good workforce. That is why the GovCon Show was created and why it matters. People in this profession need more than sterile explanations. They need context with a full translation. They need someone to say, yes, this is confusing. Yes, the way your company handles this may be making it harder. No, you are not crazy for thinking the system is weird. That is not complaining. That is just professional honesty. And there is a big difference. Complaining says this is hard and I hate it. Professional honesty says this is hard, here is why, and here's what we need to understand before we make it worse. So if you're in leadership, here's the part you need to hear. Your people are not just doing tasks. They are navigating an ever-changing environment. And if your environment is unclear, that is not their personal defect. That is your operating condition. You cannot keep adding requirements, tools, and priorities without also giving people clarity. You cannot demand speed, then hide the path. You shouldn't expect judgment from people that you never train, or expect consistency from people who are forced to survive on folklore. And you also cannot keep pretending that they should know this is a strategy. Should they? Maybe. But did you build a system that helps them know it? Did you train them? Or more importantly, did you explain the why? And ask yourself if you're really giving your team a safe place to ask questions without being treated like a problem child. Because if you're not, then the issue is not just employee performance. It's a leadership design. All right, I'm bringing this one home. The Federal Acquisition Labyrinth is real. It's not just a phrase in our intro that we made up. It's the world this profession operates in. It's the external maze of rules and clauses and systems, obligations and change. And it's the internal maze that companies build when they fail to translate all of that into clear operating reality. That's why people get lost. They get lost because the maze is real. The map is incomplete, and too many companies confuse survival with competence. So before you blame the employee, look at the environment. Before you blame the process, ask whether anyone understands it. And before you blame the training, ask whether the training actually teaches people how to navigate. But most importantly, before you say they should know better, the better question to ask is, how exactly were they supposed to know? That's the question that separates leadership from blame. Because in this business, the maze is not going away. Government contracting will remain complicated. The rules will keep moving. The portals will continue to look like they were assembled during a power outage. And the acronyms will be breeding in captivity. None of that is changing. So the real question is whether your organization is helping your people navigate the labyrinth, or are you just handing them a flashlight and hoping they find civilization before the next status meeting? This has been the GovCon Show, broadcasting from deep within the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth. If you found any benefit in this episode, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And yeah, this one was cleared for public release, but just barely.
If today's episode sounded a little too familiar, that's probably a sign. Until next time, keep your files tight, your logic tighter. Remember, if your compliance approach is built on checking boxes, you're building risk. We'll see you next time on the GovCon Show.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.